Hello, second graders. Welcome to Miss Sarah's Kitchen. We are going to do our Hero Elementary experiment from my kitchen today. So, some of you will remember that the last week we were all together in our classroom. We did a little experiment where we heated up some everyday items like a piece of chocolate, a birthday candle, a gummy worm, and an ice cube. And we made some predictions about what we thought would happen to those things when we heated them up. Now, we kind of knew the ice would melt, right? That's obvious. We heat it up, it becomes water, and then eventually if it boils, it becomes steam. And we thought the chocolate would melt. We didn't expect that the candle would melt so easily. But when we melted it, we found that the wax around it melted and left the wick intact. That's what it looked like when we melted it. Miss Sarah went ahead and melted the stuff again at home, and see, I melted the chocolate, but you could see I burned it a little bit. I left it too long on the stove, but it's still smushy like when we touched it in class. And I'm working on this gummy worm. Remember, we didn't know if the gummy worm would melt, but it sure did. Look at the shape of that gummy worm versus this one. It takes a little longer to melt, but it sure does. It becomes really squishy. Ooh, it's hot. Don't touch hot stuff from the stove. That's for adults. Okay, so now today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna see what happens when we put these things that we've melted back into the freezer to freeze them up again. We're gonna see if we can change them back or not. Make a prediction about what thing might change back and might not change back by putting it in the freezer, right? We have our melted chocolate, our melted gummy worm, our melted candle, and our ice cube. Okay, the ice is not melted yet, but let's pretend it's melted. I'll fill it with water and see what happens. So here, we'll pretend this is our melted ice, okay? Miss Sarah's gonna put this all back in the freezer and then check back in a little while later to see what's happened. Hello, second graders. It's been a couple hours now since I first put those materials in my freezer, and I've just taken them out and I want to show you what they looked like. So now remember, our question was, what do you think is going to happen to these items when we put them back into the freezer? Will we change them back to the way they were? In what ways will that happen? Or in what ways will that not happen, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at what happened. So, first let's look at the chocolate. Now, it didn't go back to its form where it looked like a Hershey bar, right? It was a little rectangle of chocolate that looked like this, okay? It doesn't look the same. However, the texture did change. Now when I press on it, it's hard and I can crack it into pieces rather than mushy where I could press down on it, okay? So it hardened in the freezer. You can see I can pick up little pieces of it. Okay, so we didn't make it back into this shape, right? We would need a mold in order to make the Hershey look like a Hershey again. However, when we froze it, it did get hard again, okay? Even harder than this soft chocolate is. Let's take a look at our birthday candle. Did this change? Well, the wax was melty when I took it off the stove, and now it's very hard. I could scrape away at it and take off a bit of the wax. You can see it kind of crinkling off. So the wax hardened in the freezer. Of course, it didn't go back into the shape of a candle. We didn't have a mold to make it into a candle again, but the wax did change. I'm trying to show you that little piece that came off. Now it's very crackly and hard, as opposed to running and flowy, right? So the cold changed it back into more like what the candle looked like before. Not what it looked like, but what it felt like, okay? Now let's look at this gummy worm. So the gummy worm didn't change back into the shape of a gummy worm, but now it's very hard. It's even really hard to bend. It's so frozen that it's not even flexible like our warm gummy worm was, or our room temperature gummy worm. So if we had put it back into a mold of a gummy worm, it probably would have taken that gummy worm shape again. So now if I try to peel it off, it's very hard, very stuck to the tin foil. Ooh, tin foil's even ripping off. That's how hard it is, and stuck on there it is. So I wish you could feel it. Can you hear it? It's very hard. All right, the last thing we'll look at, our water became ice, right? If we had put it back in the ice tray, it would have taken that same shape of the ice cube, but since we put it back in here and it was liquid, it took the shape of the container and then it froze in that shape. It also expanded. So I had about half of the cup of water, and when it froze, it expanded. It got bigger. Okay, so that's our ice. So in this experiment, we used some superpowers of science. We used our superpower of comparing to figure out how the items would be different before and after they were heated and cooled. We explained what happened to them when they were heated up and when they were cooled down. We investigated by freezing them to see how they would change. And we observed by taking a look at the way that things changed or didn't change when we heat them up or put them in the freezer. Okay, so those are some of the superpowers of science that we used. I hope that was fun. And then on the next slide, you'll get to go to Hero Elementary and do some activities.